Hi, today's movie called The World's End, spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The story is about five guys who have an ordinary day turned into the best day of their lives. This fun began on June 22nd, 1990, the day they graduated from high school. Ollie was funny and always made a big deal out of himself, but they called him Owen because of the birthmark on his temple in the shape of a 6. Steve was the cool guy the main character was always playing guitar with and flirting with the girls. Pete was the youngest of the crew, pretty humorous and compact. Andy was the squire who was always being bet on. There was nothing fun about their school, unless you count Mr. Schaefer, who was on the same page as the narrator, but never understood his idea of how one could live on a total high. Newton Haven was their playground, but that night it became the site of a heroic trek along a route involving 12 pubs, the finish line being a pub called
The World's End.
Thus began their adult life with punishment, fun, and of course a couple of girls. By the 5th pub that day, they were haunted by a feeling of indestructibility and decided to refuel with dope from a man they called the Reverend Herbalist. Halfway through they lost Ollie, but no big deal. At the next pub he ran into his sister, went into the handicapped bathroom with her where he ran into her again, but at the next pub he already had a date with another blonde. After the 9th pub they met with a war. The guys went to a keg club, easier to call this place a smokehouse, where they got thoroughly bumped. In the end they hit the last 3 pubs and saw the sunrise with puked up shoes and broken fists. This story was told by 40-year-old alcoholic and loser Gary King at the AA club, because it was the happiest moment of his life. But one guy broke that happy shard of memories with the simple assertion that they never made it to the end, but it also gave him a good idea. While his classmates were company representatives, entrepreneurs, athletes, and family men, Gary was living in a rented room with a creative mess. His first target was Pete, who works for a car company. Gary talked him into it under the pretense that the other guys had already agreed, so Pete had no choice but to ask his wife's permission to finally finish the journey. He then heads over to his fellow guitarist, Steven, who is already wondering how Andy could have said yes if he was in an accident, but Gary convinces him that all is well and they should take the golden path again. To good old Oliver, Gary blows off the real estate deal and calls for a reunion on Friday when they take the long drive to Newton Haven. And the latest target is the same Andy, who has been in a car accident according to past alcohol Olympians. Andy doesn't fall for Gary's simple tricks, because he hasn't had a drink in 16 years. And according to him, unlike him, he remembers Monday morning and Gary only Friday night and asks him to leave the office. But Gary tells him that his mother died 2 weeks ago and she thought Andy was a very nice guy. In general, you can't even hide it, Andy was Gary's best friend. When all the guys gathered at the appointed place at the appointed time, Gary didn't arrive until an hour later, which already made the company of guys angry. On the way, he turned around and stopped at a gas station to relieve himself, but while the guys were waiting for him, they found out that Gary owed each of them money. And as they were pulling into their gold town, they were stopped by the police, but Gary had no papers or license, so he offered to have the policeman run him through the database, calling himself Pete and later explaining to him that he had followed him and changed the address on his license, so his fines came to his account. Upon arriving in this dull little town, they made their way confidently to the pubs, repeating the antics of their youth. At the first bar, however, the game changed. Andy replaced his beer with a glass of filtered water. Gary was shocked by this action, but after missing the first glass, he had the boys move on to the next bar. But there it turned out to be the same pattern. Ollie received a call from his sister, whom Gary had bumped into a little earlier, though Steve liked her at the time. When she shows up at the bar, she's defiantly happy to meet all the guys except Gary, and heads for the restroom, but Gary takes this as a hint and goes after her, where he gets his unshaven cheeks kicked. On their way to the next location, they notice a new landmark in Newton Haven, a statue erected in the modernist style. However, at the next bar, Gary is finally recognized as the head of the blacklist and kicked out. However, he doesn't give up hope and drinks a glass of beer from the leftovers so as not to break the rule of having a glass at every pub. At bar 4, Gary was watching the 5 young guys, reminiscing about his childhood, but when a man came up to Pete asking for a chair, Steve recognized him as the same guy who had bullied him all his past, but the sickest part was that now he didn't even recognize him, he just looked right through him. When Andy realizes that Gary was only looking for drinking buddies, he convinces the guys to go home, which offends Gary and he leaves, but he forgets the phone on the table and gets a call from his mother. In the meantime, our hero gets mad because his trip is disrupted and he tries to talk to the guy, but it's like he's in total ignoring mode, which pisses Gary off and the guys get into a fight, during which Gary throws the guy against the urinal and his head explodes, but the blood is replaced by blue liquid mechanisms. The next second the guys walk into the bathroom, Andy is incredibly pissed off at Gary for lying about the death of his mom, who he just talked to. But their fight is stopped by the headless guy and his co-workers who enter the bathroom and start a 5-on-5 fight, 5-on-4 to be exact. Soon the fight ends with a bunch of mechanical meat, which they decide to hush up and continue drinking so the others don't realize what happened, realizing that it's not them that has changed, but the city, which is most likely full of similar robots. They were going to let Andy drive, but he disagreed with the idea, pouring 5 shots into his stomach. So to make sure the robots didn't realize they knew everything, the friends continued on their way through the bars. At one of them, Gary spotted Sam and pushed her into the handicapped restroom insert and tried to tell her what was going on.
Unless you do want to have sex, in which case I'll tell you afterwards.
Tell me right now.
But she didn't believe him and told it to her twin sisters, who were even talking
Did you
in
believe
sync.
him?
They thought Sam knew they were robots, but Gary immediately knocked them down and got rid of one robot, proving his point. When he's done with the two, Steve shows up and confesses his love to Sam, but this tragic moment is interrupted by a twin with legs instead of arms who is overpowered by Steve. In the following pubs, they meet live people, the former drug dealer Trevor Green. By the way, in the same pub Oliver goes to the toilet, and Steve meets the crazy old man Basil. The latter informs the heroes that Newton Haven, on June 22nd, 90, that very Friday, became a beachhead for an alien invasion, for that evening a meteorite fell into their city and, according to the old man, the creatures hit underground and evolved, then got out and started abducting people and replacing them with exaggeratedly polite and friendly copies recreated from the DNA of the original, which they get from kisses, items from memories, and even saliva on the edge of the glass, which is why he drinks with this weird straw. Steve saves the half-drunk heroes who are trying to be seduced by copies of girls from their childhood. Outside, Sam notices that the situation is heating up and Oliver arouses suspicion with his sobriety and his request to continue on his way in such a critical situation. At the 9th pub, they engage in a straightforward conversation with a copy of Guy Shepard, the former headmaster of their school. Shepard convinces the heroes that he and those like him are not robots, but improved humans, and the heroes should peacefully join their community. Oliver, who has gone to the bathroom, turns out to be a switched-up copy. Andy notices that he has developed a birthmark on his temple, which the real Oliver has removed, and stabs the robot without leaving his head. Guy sets off the alarm and asks the team to surrender for their future introduction to the city's improvement program, but Andy meets this 9th pub with war, just as he did years ago. Gary and his friends put up a new fight with numerous copies. They manage to escape, and King escorts Sam out of town, putting her in his car, while he continues his desperate trek through the pubs. When Gary runs into the smokehouse, where everyone proves their humanity by showing different scars, and Gary bangs his head against the wall.
Yes, Gary.
In the woods, they lose another of the company, Peter, who is captured and replaced by a copy of his high school foe while trying to deal with it. Gary offers to continue on his way, but Andy gives him 2 options: either they take off right now and leave, or Andy knocks him out and drags him to the car. As you can understand, Gary chooses the second one. By this time, the robots who had lost their human form were patrolling the streets, and even a robot had risen to search for these drunken varmints. But their way to the car was through 10 pub, the back exit of which was also patrolled, and Gary woke up and still had a drink to complete his journey. After which he escapes to 11 bar, and Andy, realizing it's his friend, goes after him. Robots, statues, police officers appear in his path, but nothing can stop him. At this time, Gary takes his last sips and Steve bursts into bar 11 in a car, but is immediately surrounded, and this forces Andy to catch up with Gary, who is on his way to Armageddon. There he is prevented from finishing his journey, and a fight ensues between the men, and it is revealed that his seemingly carefree friend started the whole event in a state of extreme depression. Gary's sleeve was taped under his sleeve with a hospital bandage, indicating that Gary had tried to slit his wrists. Suddenly, the bar begins to descend into a dungeon full of robots who offer Gary cooperation on behalf of his young model, but he refuses the lucrative offer. The purpose of the aliens was to prepare the Earth for introduction into the intergalactic system through some sacrifices. Without them, there would be no such development of communication on Earth. But Steve shows up, and the guys make it clear to the well-wishers, if they can be called such, that people do not want to listen to anyone, but want to live as they wish and enjoy what surrounds them. Because of this, the intelligent alien network takes offense and leaves Earth, leading all the robots out. When they get out, Sam shows up and takes the guys away from the huge explosion of the last bar. As they leave Newton Haven, the blast wave hits them and they end up right on the very mountain where Gary was sitting watching the sunset years ago. The story then opens us up to a new line where Andy wasn't so much an office worker telling stories to poor people. After that explosion, the net blew some kind of pulse across the Earth and destroyed all technology on Earth, bringing it back to the Middle Ages. It had its perks. Andy had his wife back. They were eating the right foods, though Andy still remembered the old ones. The most unexpected thing was the autonomous turning on of the robots. After a week, they wandered and didn't know where they were going. But a little later, Oliver's robot recovered and took up selling real estate. Peter came home and showed us an Easter egg to the Wednesday thing, even though the movie was made back in 2013. Stephen and Sam moved in together and began living in the middle of nowhere near London. But Andy doesn't know what happened to Gary. There were rumors that he went back to Newton Haven, but Andy had little faith in that. It turned out to be true though. There he got his crew and went to another pub, requesting 5 glasses of water for his crew, but the bartender refused to give the water to the pacifiers, which provoked a scuffle, and Gary only enjoyed it.